Hey guys! Tonight we drift into the narrow, lamplit streets of post-war Paris, where the air still hangs heavy with the scent of coal smoke and overworked frying oil. You're pedaling along on a battered old bicycle, your hands numb from the autumn chill, your ears tuned to the uneven rattle of its rusty chain. The streetlights throw halos in the mist, and somewhere ahead, you can just make out the soft putter of a strange little vehicle that seems more toy than car. This is where the peculiar story of French three-wheeled microcars begins. Born not from luxury, but from scarcity and stubborn imagination. And you probably won't survive this if you try riding one downhill without working brakes. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening somewhere far from Paris, post your location and local time in the comments. Always fun to see who's awake. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Paris you trudge through tonight is still healing. The war has left bomb scars on buildings and on faces. And fuel is scarce enough that you'd think petrol was liquid gold. Ordinary families can't dream of owning a proper automobile. And even if they could, the ration books say otherwise. You pass shop windows filled with bicycles, handcarts, and ingenious contraptions that seem cobbled together from whatever scrap the city's workshops can manage. That's where the three-wheeler begins to creep into the picture. Not as a luxury, but as a loophole. See, the French government, in its wisdom, or perhaps just in bureaucratic oversight, decides that vehicles with three wheels and small engines fall into a special category. They're cheaper to register, taxed less, and, most importantly, can often be driven without a full license. For Parisians just trying to get to work without arriving drenched in rain or frozen stiff. This loophole is like discovering you can bring an entire extra suitcase onto a train if it's labeled picnic supplies. You catch sight of one now. A skinny little machine with two wheels in front and one in the back. Its metal skin painted a shade of beige that can only be described as leftover paint from a garden shed. The driver sits bolt upright, bundled in a wool coat, while a plume of exhaust drifts lazily into the cold air. You can almost hear the tiny engine's desperate hum, more sewing machine than motor car, as it struggles over the cobblestones. Historical fact? The earliest seeds of this came from pedal-powered velocars, built by Charles Michelet before the war. They were essentially enclosed bicycles. The kind you'd pedal while pretending you were driving a real car. After the war, some clever souls thought, why not just stick a small engine on it? Problem solved. Sort of. Quirky tidbit? The first of these petrol-powered versions often kept the bicycle-style steering levers instead of a proper wheel, so you could feel like you were rowing yourself to work. You roll past a cafe where two men are deep in conversation over small cups of black coffee. One points out the window toward the passing microcar, and you can almost read his lips. Ce n'est pas une vraie voiture. That's not a real car. And yet, the person driving it seems unbothered, even proud. After all, when the alternative is shivering on a bicycle in the rain, a not real car starts looking like a dream. The city's side streets are full of similar sights. Tinkerers adjusting chains, tightening bolts, or swapping bicycle pedals for footrests. Historians still argue whether these machines were truly a revolutionary step in personal transport, or just an awkward stopgap until proper cars became affordable again. Either way, you can feel the atmosphere of experimentation. Paris in the late 1940s is a place where necessity pushes people into strange, creative corners. Your pedals squeak as you turn onto Rue de l'Orc, where a small workshop hums with activity. Inside, The smell of oil and sawdust blends with the faint aroma of stale bread from the baker next door. Bent over a workbench, a man in a flat cap files down a piece of metal that will soon become part of a steering column. Another worker balances a flimsy body shell on sawhorses, its panels thin enough that a strong kick might dent them permanently. One of the apprentices catches you peering through the doorway and grins. "Not much to look at now," he says in French. "But wait until it moves." And you can picture it. The moment when this rough skeleton will rattle down the street, carrying someone just a little drier, just a little warmer than they would have been on a bicycle. By the time you reach the canal, the street lamps have begun to flicker. The city is quieter here. The only sounds the slap of water against the quay and the faint clink of metal from another late-night mechanic. A three-wheeler rolls past you. Headlights dim. Engine humming in an almost apologetic tone. It's not glamorous. Not fast. Not even particularly comfortable. But it's freedom. On three wheels. In a city that still needs reminding of what freedom feels like. You follow that little three-wheeler's taillight until it disappears down a side street. And in its wake, you find yourself imagining the man most responsible for bringing this peculiar vision to life. Charles Michaud. His name might not be as famous as Citroën or Peugeot, but in his small, inventive corner of France, he's the kind of figure who inspires both admiration and a few raised eyebrows. It's the mid-1920s when Michaud first starts building his Microcars. A sort of recumbent bicycle with a weather-shielded body. Imagine a pedal-powered capsule, barely wider than a wardrobe, but with a roof to keep the rain off. It's light enough to push up a hill and aerodynamic enough, well, in theory, to coast downhill without the wind stopping you dead. During the war years, when petrol was rationed into near mythical scarcity, these contraptions became minor celebrities. You couldn't buy fuel for a Renault, but you could pedal a Microcar all day without attracting the ration inspectors. After the war, Michaud looks at his designs and thinks, why not let the legs rest and let a motor do the work? Thus begins the delicate surgery of adding a tiny engine to what was, essentially, a dressed-up bicycle frame. The early prototypes keep their wooden floorboards and spindly wheels. But tucked under the bonnet, or what passes for one, is an engine barely bigger than a modern blender. You can practically hear the workshop conversation. Do we need stronger brakes? Quote, nah, it's not going fast enough to matter. One brisk morning in late 1949, you step into Michaud's cramped workshop. The air smells of hot oil and cut metal, and every available surface is covered with parts. Some clearly meant for cars, others obviously borrowed from bicycles. Michaud himself, a wiry man with sharp eyes and a surprisingly neat mustache, is hunched over a drawing board. His pencil scratches out a rough sketch of a three-wheeler with a rounded nose and narrow cabin. Historical fact? Michaud's post-war petrol Microcars, like the CM125Y, used a 125cc Edril engine, an unassuming little two-stroke that produced a majestic 5 horsepower. Quirky tidbit? Some models had a gear lever sticking out of the dashboard like a misplaced broom handle, forcing drivers to reach forward and grope for a gear mid-turn. One of the workshop assistants rolls a prototype outside for a test. The chassis creaks under its own weight, and the engine sputters into life with a cloud of blue smoke. You watch as the driver, scarf wrapped tight, goggles strapped on, climbs in and sets off down the street. It's not so much a roar as a polite ahem from the exhaust. But still, the onlookers nod approvingly. This isn't about speed. It's about moving under your own power without freezing your legs off in December. The city, of course, reacts in its usual way. Half curious, half skeptical. You overhear one elderly man at a cafe say these things will never last. That once petrol returns to pre-war abundance, everyone will abandon them. His friend disagrees, insisting they're perfect for navigating Paris's narrow streets. Historians still argue whether the microcar's charm was a matter of necessity or genuine affection from its drivers. Later that day, you follow Miché and his test driver to a small, open stretch of road by the river. The little three-wheeler trundles back and forth, each lap revealing a new squeak or rattle that will need fixing. At one point, the engine stalls completely, and Miché mutters something about fuel feed nonsense before grabbing a wrench. You can't help but smile. It's the same scene that would play out in any garage, whether you're working on a Ferrari or a glorified pedal car. Evening falls, and the workshop's single light bulb casts a yellow glow over the half-finished frames. Miché leans against a bench, sipping from a chipped enamel mug, and you sense the quiet pride behind his stoic demeanor. He's not just building a machine. He's giving people mobility in a time when mobility feels like luxury. Somewhere outside, you hear the putter of another three-wheeler passing by, its headlamp cutting a thin slice through the Paris fog. It's a reminder that these odd little creations are already finding their way into everyday life, one sputtering journey at a time. By the time you leave Miché's workshop behind, the streets have grown darker and the air damper. But up ahead, a glimmer of curved glass catches your eye. You wander closer, and there it is. One of the early microcar prototypes that doesn't so much sit on the street as huddle there, like it's hoping no one notices its odd proportions. Its most striking feature? A massive, bubble-like canopy that makes it look like a goldfish bowl on wheels. You step up to it, and the driver inside swings open the canopy with a squeal of hinges. A wave of warm, slightly oily air wafts out, along with the smell of damp wool from the driver's coat. The seats inside are more like upholstered folding chairs than anything from a proper car. And your knees would be brushing your chin if you sat down. You take in the instrument panel. 2 gauges, 1 switch, and a speedometer that optimistically goes up to 80 kilometers per hour. This new wave of designs is where French three-wheelers start to develop a certain eccentric charm. Historical fact? Some models, like the Avalette Record, borrowed cockpit-style canopies directly from aircraft surplus. Because after the war, France had far more leftover plexiglass bubbles than it had luxury car parts. Quirky tidbit? In some cases, the canopy latch was literally a repurposed kitchen cupboard handle. The driver, a wiry man with a mischievous grin, invites you to ride along. You slide into the cramped passenger seat, your elbow brushing the inside of the canopy. The view is panoramic. Paris seems to wrap around you in all directions. But the sound inside is a constant, tinny rattle as the engine coughs into motion. The canopy fogs slightly from your breath, and the driver wipes a small porthole clear with his glove so you can see the road. You set off down Rue Saint-Martin, the cobblestones thumping under the 3 small tires. Every bump sends a vibration straight into your spine. But it's oddly exhilarating, like riding inside a moving snow globe. You pass a cafe where a group of students bursts into laughter at the sight of your tiny craft. Gliding past, the driver leans over and mutters. They laugh now, but wait until it rains. Quote, and rain it does. A fine mist at first, then heavier drops pattering against the canopy. The sound is surprisingly pleasant. A hollow, drum-like rhythm that almost drowns out the engine's drone. You can feel the dampness creeping in at the base of the doors. But compared to being soaked on a bicycle, this is luxury. Historians still argue whether this design shift toward bubble canopies was truly about aerodynamics or simply about showing off a modern, futuristic look to entice buyers. The driver pulls onto a slightly wider road, And now the little engine's whine rises to a higher pitch. The sensation is strange. You feel like you're moving fast because the world is rushing past the canopy's curved glass. But a quick glance at the speedometer shows you're barely touching 45 kilometers per hour. You pass a delivery van with tires taller than your whole car. And the driver gives a bemused wave as he overtakes you with ease. By the time you loop back toward the city center, the rain has stopped, leaving beads of water clinging to the canopy. They catch the glow of the street lamps, scattering the light like tiny prisms. It's oddly beautiful. And for a moment, you forget the cramped seating, the questionable suspension, and the fact that you've been inhaling two-stroke exhaust for 20 minutes. Back on the curb, you climb out and watch the little bubble car putter away, its canopy reflecting the last of the evening lights. In that moment, you realize, these microcars aren't just transportation. They're moving curiosities, little rolling experiments that make the city feel alive with possibility, even if their engines are barely stronger than a lawnmower's. The rain has stopped, but the streets are still slick and shining as you wander past the river toward a dimly lit newsstand. The evening papers are plastered with headlines about strikes, shortages, and, tucked in the corner, new proposals for motor vehicle regulations. You hand over a few francs for a copy, and as you unfold it, a small column catches your attention. Changements aux taxes sur véhicules légers. Changes to taxes on light vehicles. You already know the gist. Post-war France isn't just rebuilding its roads. It's rewriting the rules of who can drive what. Fuel is precious. Asphalt is limited. And the government has an interest in keeping big, heavy vehicles off the road. At least until the economy finds its legs again. That's where the 3 wheels good, 4 wheels expensive mentality takes root. Historical fact? In France, vehicles with engines under a certain displacement, often under 125 cc, could be classified as cyclomotors or light quadricycles, which came with drastically lower taxes and often no full driver's license requirement. Quirky tidbit? Some crafty owners tried registering full-sized cars as modified tricycles by simply removing a wheel, until inspectors caught on. You fold the paper and keep walking, imagining how those regulations ripple through workshops like mishaps. Suddenly, a contraption with 3 wheels isn't just an engineering choice. It's a ticket to affordable independence. For a factory worker earning barely enough for rent, the difference in registration fees could mean the choice between having a vehicle or not. You pass a group of young men huddled around a parked microcar. Pointing at the number plate, one of them says, "Pas besoin de permis." No license needed. And they all grin. The owner, leaning casually against the thin metal body, seems almost smug. He knows he's gaming the system. The roads themselves are part of the story. Paris's main boulevards can handle a Citroën traction avant or a big Renault without trouble. But stray into the medieval backstreets, and suddenly a narrow, nimble 3-wheeler makes perfect sense. The sidewalks blend into the road edges, turning driving into a polite game of you go, then I go. The microcars slip through with an agility the big sedans can't match. Like minnows darting past lumbering carp. Historians still argue whether this regulatory environment was a deliberate push toward small, efficient vehicles or just an accidental loophole that innovators exploited. Whatever the case, it gives the French 3-wheeler its moment. Manufacturers who might otherwise have been dismissed as hobbyists find themselves with real customers. Later that week, you find yourself at a small exhibition in a municipal hall, where the local transport ministry displays approved vehicle types. Among the practical delivery vans and modest family sedans sits a row of microcars. Their paint polished, their tires shined. There's a quiet pride in how they're presented. like someone wants the public to see them as the future. A bureaucrat in a brown suit gives a short speech about encouraging innovation while meeting national needs, but you catch the way his eyes light up when a young woman in a bright scarf steps into one of the display models and pretends to steer. This isn't just about policy. It's about showing people a lifestyle. One that says you can afford the freedom of the road without the crushing costs of a big car. On your way out, you pass a small stack of pamphlets explaining the tax benefits of owning a light vehicle. They read almost like propaganda, filled with smiling couples on country lanes and happy workers arriving at the factory gate on time. You pocket one, thinking about how rules written in an office can change the very shape of the machines rolling down the street, and somewhere in the back of your mind, you can already hear the faint, tinny hum of engines that exist purely because of those rules. Their little wheels turning in sync with the loopholes of the law. It's a bright Saturday morning now, the kind that makes even the soot-streaked rooftops of Paris look a little cheerful. You've wandered toward Boulevard Saint-Germain, where the cafes are beginning to fill with well-dressed Parisians. Scarves draped just so, cigarette smoke curling lazily into the air. And then, cutting through the clink of coffee cups and murmured conversation, comes the gentle put-put-put of a three-wheeled microcar gliding by like it owns the place. Heads turn, not in derision this time, but with the kind of attention you give to a stylish stranger at a party. This one isn't beige or dented. No, this little machine is painted a gleaming deep red, the kind of red that makes you think of lipstick or polished apples. Chrome trim catches the sunlight, and the driver, dark sunglasses, silk scarf, looks like they stepped out of a fashion magazine. This is the moment where style begins to matter. Historical fact? By the early 1950s, French manufacturers realized that selling microcars wasn't just about affordability. They had to make them desirable. And so, small studios began offering bright paint jobs, two-tone finishes, and even faux wood paneling to lure image-conscious buyers. Quirky tidbit? Some companies partnered with department stores to display microcars in their shop windows. Parked between mannequins in the latest Parisian couture, you follow the red three-wheeler as it pulls up outside a boutique. The driver steps out, tossing the scarf over one shoulder, and disappears inside. A few passers-by slow down, eyeing the little machine. You can almost hear the unspoken thought, maybe I could pull that off. It's the same phenomenon you see decades later with designer handbags or tiny Italian scooters. Objects that carry more personality than practicality. Down the street, you come across a small rally of microcar owners. Each vehicle more flamboyant than the last one has hand-painted floral designs curling across its panels. Another sports a canopy with stripes like a circus tent. There's even one with leopard print seat covers that look like they've been stolen from a cabaret. It's less a car meet and more a rolling fashion show. Historians still argue whether this sudden emphasis on style helped prolong the microcar's life or simply turned it into a novelty fad. But here, watching the owners chat and laugh while polishing chrome bumpers, you get the sense that being seen in one was half the point. In the midst of it all, a young couple poses for a photo beside their pale blue model. The man leans against the fender with practiced nonchalance, while the woman sits in the driver's seat, tilting her head in a way that says she knows exactly how the camera will catch her. The car itself gleams in the morning light, every curve a tiny act of defiance against the idea that small equals dull. As you wander away, the rally begins to move off, the little engines buzzing in harmony like an oversized swarm of mechanical bees. People step aside on the sidewalks, some smiling, others shaking their heads, but everyone watching. For a moment, you realize, these three-wheelers aren't just filling a transportation gap. They're claiming space in the city's imagination. turning every cobblestoned corner into a miniature catwalk. And somewhere, back in a workshop on the edge of town, you can picture a designer sketching out the next bold paint scheme, certain that a splash of color might just sell another dozen of these odd little chariots. A few weeks later, you're standing on a drafty ferry dock along the Seine, watching a curious scene unfold. A crowd has gathered around two parked microcars. One French, one unmistakably German. The French model, compact and graceful in its own slightly awkward way, sits beside the angular, almost insect-like form of a Messerschmitt KR200. The difference is startling. The Messerschmitt, with its elongated nose and aircraft-style canopy, looks like it's preparing for takeoff. It has the kind of over-engineered neatness you expect from post-war German manufacturing. The French three-wheeler next to it, painted a jaunty yellow, seems to shrug at the comparison, as if saying, "Yes, but I have charm." Historical fact? The Messerschmitt Microcars, originally designed by an aircraft engineer, had exceptional aerodynamics and could hit speeds that made French models wheeze in protest. Quirky tidbit: French enthusiasts sometimes joke that their cars could probably win a race against a Messerschmitt if the German one had 3 flat tires and was pointed uphill. You lean against a post as a lively argument breaks out. One man insists the French design is better for real city driving. Narrower, lighter, less likely to trap you in traffic. Another waves his hand dismissively, pointing out that the Messerschmitt's build quality is miles ahead, and its top speed could actually get you out of Paris without a prayer and a picnic basket. Historians still argue whether French manufacturers were genuinely competing with German bubble cars or if they were simply parallel experiments born from similar post-war constraints. The truth probably lies somewhere between rivalry and coincidence. But for the people here, it's personal. This isn't about specs. It's about national pride wrapped in fiberglass and sheet metal. The Messerschmitt owner offers a cheeky demonstration, firing up the engine with a crisp, high-pitched growl. The little German machine zips forward with startling acceleration, doing a tight loop before parking neatly again. A few impressed murmurs ripple through the crowd. The French owner, undeterred, climbs into his own vehicle, cranks the starter, and putters forward in a dignified, almost aristocratic pace. He gives a theatrical wave as he passes, earning laughter and applause. Later, the two owners park side by side for photographs. The yellow French three-wheeler, with its softer curves and narrower stance, looks almost bashful next to the Messerschmitt's confident, militaristic lines. You find yourself thinking of them less as competitors and more like distant cousins. One raised on strong coffee and boulevard gossip, the other on precision tools and a stopwatch. As the sun sets, the two machines roll off in different directions, their engines fading into the urban hum. And you're left with the sense that part of the microcar's identity in France was shaped not only by necessity or style, but by the quiet desire to hold its own against its neighbors, even if that meant doing so with a wink rather than a win. You keep moving along the assembly line, feeling how the rhythm of work has become something like a slow, unchanging heartbeat. It is the kind of beat you can almost lean against. Never quick, never slow, always there, day after day. You can picture the way the new Model Ts seem to glide forward without hurry, each one taking shape like a loaf rising in an oven. Nobody rushes, nobody lingers. The entire place runs on a steady tide of motion, and you are swept along with it. During one of the longer tea breaks, you find yourself by a side window, looking out over the factory yard. The air smells faintly of oil and hot metal, but here it's mixed with the sharper scent of tea leaves steeping in enamel mugs. A few workers swap stories about the weekend, their voices low and lazy, as though they have no urgency to return to the line. And why would they? The brake is part of the machine's pulse. There's no sense in rushing back early. You'd only stand there waiting for your part of the process to arrive. From your vantage point, you notice how the foremen don't scold anyone for stretching the brake by a minute or two. It's as though they've accepted that rest is built into the rhythm now. Years ago, such leniency would have been unheard of. Back then, work was a continuous grind, and rest was stolen in snatches. Now, with the assembly line's clockwork certainty, management can predict exactly how many cars will be built in a day. And they can afford to let people sip their tea without the old sense of panic about lost minutes. Some of the older men talk about the early days of Ford, when everything was done in a jumble. A chassis here, a pile of wheels there, mechanics darting around like ants. They tell you that back then, there were no proper tea breaks. Just a quick swig from a bottle and back to work. The younger workers can barely imagine it. They've grown up with the hum of the moving track, the knowledge that at certain times, the whole place exhales together. You finish your tea slowly, letting the mug warm your hands. Outside, a cart rattles past, carrying crates of parts. Somewhere far down the line, a whistle blows. Not the sharp alarm of danger, but the soft signal that the next batch of work is ready. It's time to return, but there's no scramble, no shoving back into place. Everyone moves together, almost like dancers returning to their marks. As you step back onto the line, you notice something you hadn't before. The way people's movements mirror one another. A wrench lifted here, a bolt tightened there. These gestures ripple down the row like a choreographed performance. Even the smallest motions have become part of a shared pattern. And within that pattern, you realize, the tea breaks are not interruptions. They are pauses in the music. Rests in a score that keeps the whole piece balanced. You settle back into your position, fingers wrapping around familiar tools. The metal is cool at first, but quickly warms under your grip. You work almost without thinking now, each step leading naturally to the next. The smell of tea still lingers in your senses, mixing with the faint tang of grease. Around you, the great, slow heartbeat of the factory goes on. You move deeper into the timeline, and the car now rolls into an era when the open road began to seem almost infinite. The dust and mud of the earlier decades have given way to gravel and, in some places, early stretches of asphalt, a marvel that feels almost decadent beneath your tires. You sense the hum of the car's mechanics change ever so slightly. Less rattle from the suspension, a smoother pull when you accelerate. You realize the engineers behind this design understood something. That the joy of driving wasn't just in getting somewhere, but in how the journey felt under every turn of the wheels. The cabin you're imagining grows a bit more refined now. The bench seats are still basic, but the leather smells richer. The stitching neater. It's not luxury yet. No radio, no air conditioning, but you can see how each improvement is meant to tempt the ordinary driver into thinking, this is good enough for me to go further than I've ever gone before. The sound of the engine blends with the wind outside, not drowned out, but joined in a kind of duet that you realize could be hypnotic if you let it. The towns you pass now seem to have caught on to the car's popularity. Gasoline stations, actual ones, with pumps instead of hand-poured cans, dot the roadside like dependable oases. You begin to notice their branding. The way some use bold colors and tall signs to make themselves visible from far away. Some even have attendants in matching uniforms. A strange formality in this still young age of motoring. You also begin to see more roadside eateries and boarding houses. The owners have clearly realized that cars mean travelers. And travelers need to eat, rest, and sometimes stay overnight. A few places even offer motor courts. Early motels where you can park your car right outside your door. A concept that seems almost absurdly modern compared to where you began. The weather in this section of the drive shifts. You've left behind the clear skies of the morning for a stretch where dark clouds gather ahead. You press forward, and soon the first drops splatter against the windshield. The wipers, a relatively new addition, swipe rhythmically, but you can still feel the occasional mist slipping through the side of the window frame. Cold against your cheek, the smell of wet earth rises, mingling with the scent of oil and steel inside the cabin. It's not unpleasant. In fact, it's grounding. You think of farmers and travelers from centuries past, all smelling that same earthy dampness, though none of them would have imagined experiencing it at 30 miles an hour. In the villages you pass through, people seem less startled by your arrival than they were in earlier eras. Children still wave, but they don't chase after you anymore. They've seen enough cars to know you'll be gone in seconds. The blacksmith shop now shares the main street with a mechanic's garage. And you notice that some blacksmiths have begun to hang out signs advertising tire repair, perhaps sensing where the future lies. One striking thing you notice is the gradual disappearance of horses on the road. Here and there, a cart still clatters along the shoulder, but it's clear that the motorcar has claimed the main track. Horses are now more likely to be seen in fenced pastures than in front of shops. Their role in transportation shrinking year by year. You can almost feel the quiet shift in society. The world is beginning to run on fuel, not feed. Night approaches more quickly than you expect, the clouds making the light dim faster. The headlights on your car are still primitive, powered by acetylene gas rather than electricity, but they glow faintly in the growing dark. It's not enough to flood the road in light, but it's enough to keep you moving forward. You realize, though, how treacherous night driving must have been in these times. The narrow beam ahead offers little warning for obstacles, and the thought of hitting a stray animal or pothole at speed lingers in the back of your mind. As you roll into a small town for the night, the lamps in shop windows and the soft golden glow spilling from inns give the place a kind of warm, protective aura. You decide to stop at one such inn, where a stable has been converted into a garage. The innkeeper tells you this change has been good for business. Drivers prefer knowing their cars will be under a roof, safe from rain and prying hands. You nod, feeling the odd blend of past and future in this single building. Where horses once stamped and neighed, now engines tick and cool. Upstairs, in your room, you lie in bed listening not to the wind in the trees but to the faint rumble of engines from latecomers arriving in town. The car, it seems, is no longer just a novelty. It's becoming the soundtrack of the modern world. The smell of oil and hot metal lingers in the air, blending with the faint sweetness of tea that still clings to your hands from the morning break. Machines clatter steadily, their rhythms so familiar they've become a background lullaby of the workshop. The assembly line snakes forward, a steel serpent guiding chassis past men who rarely need to speak. Their motions so well practiced they form an unspoken language. You lean into your task, the bolts fitting perfectly beneath your fingers, the wrench sliding without hesitation. There's comfort in this repetition. It shields the mind from wandering into heavier thoughts. But today, there's a shift in the air. The factory foreman, a broad-shouldered man with the kind of mustache that twitches when he's anxious, walks the line more than usual. His eyes scan each station like he's searching for an invisible fault. You overhear two men whispering something about a new production target, numbers scrawled in chalk that make their brows furrow. The Model T isn't just selling well, it's outselling everything else on the road. And with every unit shipped, Henry Ford's appetite for efficiency grows. More cars, faster, cheaper. That's the gospel here. The tea breaks, those brief, almost sacred pauses in the day, have been the topic of murmurs for weeks. Management insists they are generous, even revolutionary. But you've noticed the shift. 10 minutes feels shorter than it once did, and the whistle to signal the end now blows sharp enough to startle. You remember when tea breaks were a leisurely affair. A few sips, a slow stretch, a chance to swap a story or two. Now, the ritual feels like a race. The tin mugs clang against the long wooden bench as men gulp quickly, glancing toward the factory door as if they might miss the call. At lunch, seated on a low wall by the yard, you share bread and cheese with a fellow fitter named Arthur. He tells you about his cousin in another plant, one where the tea break has been cut in half. They call it progress, Arthur mutters, breaking the crust of his bread. But I think it's just them seeing how far they can push before we grumble too loud. You nod, though your mind drifts. It's strange how something so small, just a few minutes, can shape the whole mood of a day. The break is more than tea. It's a breath of humanity in the middle of mechanical order. Back inside, the line surges again. The new speed means less idle chatter and more focus. Your hands ache slightly from the constant tension. But there's no space to stop. The rhythm is relentless. Wrench, twist, fit, pass it on. A dropped tool now feels like a disaster. The delay rippling down the line like a slow-moving wave. You've learned to make each motion count, trimming away anything unnecessary. Even your sips of water are timed between passing chassis. A skill no one teaches but everyone acquires. Later that afternoon, an engineer in a crisp white shirt and narrow tie walks the floor with a clipboard. He doesn't belong here. His shoes are too clean. His pen too quick. He stops near your station, watching for a full minute without speaking. Then, jotting something down, he moves on. Arthur catches your eye and raises an eyebrow. The unspoken thought passes between you. They're studying us again, timing us, measuring us, shaving seconds where they can. When the final whistle of the day echoes through the rafters, there's a collective exhale. Tools are set down in unison. Rag wiping hands, stretching backs. You linger for a moment, staring at the now empty line. The motionless machinery still humming faintly with residual heat. The day's work is done, but the pace lingers in your bones like the echo of footsteps long after you've stopped walking. Outside, the air feels cooler, freer. The sky is smeared with the orange of a sinking sun, and you can almost taste the promise of the evening ahead. Still, your mind drifts to the inevitable future, when breaks might be even shorter, when the line might move even faster. It's a strange thing. You think, how progress can make the days feel longer even as the hours shrink. You button your coat, the last of the factory light spilling through the high windows behind you. Tomorrow will be the same. Familiar yet subtly different, like a song you've heard 1,000 times but can't help noticing a new note in. And as you walk toward home, the memory of warm tea on a cool morning feels like something worth holding on to. You drift further into the quiet world of post-war British motorways, where the A roads unfurl like pale ribbons across a damp green countryside. You've been following the hum of progress for so long now that it feels like a living thing beside you, a companion of constant mechanical breath. The war is over, but its shadows remain, lingering in shortages, ration books, and the steady march of a reconstruction government that wants to pull the country into something brighter. Cars, though still rationed and taxed, are beginning to multiply again, and with them comes a small revolution in the mundane. How people take breaks, how they sip tea, and how the idea of a journey is measured in more than just miles. In this quieter era, the British tea break is sacred. More so than lunch, more so than coffee in America. It is a pause, an island in the day. But the post-war economy and the influx of new factory jobs mean it is also becoming regimented, almost militarized. You imagine the endless lines of assembly workers at BMC or Austin. Their tea breaks carefully timed to the minute, signaled by the shrill ring of a wall clock or the clang of a metal bell. On the motorways, the change is subtler. The truck drivers and delivery vans that once pulled over at the side of the road for a quick swig from a thermos now find themselves with new, purpose-built lay-bys. Small cutouts from the road with just enough space for a lorry and maybe a car or two. The lay-by is a marvel of understatement. A rectangle of gravel, perhaps a single bench, and if you're lucky, a waste bin that hasn't yet blown over in the wind. Here, the tea ritual happens in miniature. The flask unscrewed, the steam drifting away into the damp air. A careful sip before the cap goes back on and the journey resumes. There is no rush, but there is a rhythm. Stop, pour, sip, pack, drive. It is the beginning of the motorway's influence on tea culture. Brakes are still personal, still steeped, no pun intended, in tradition, but they are being shaped by the new logic of the road. Meanwhile, petrol stations are beginning to change their look and their function. In the 1930s they were often little more than a pump and a man with a cap who might sell you an oily rag and a map. But now, in the 1950s, they are cautiously expanding. Some begin offering tea in paper cups. Scandalous at first, for who in Britain drinks tea from paper? And small counters with biscuits in tins. This isn't the tea room experience of the village high street, with lace curtains and ceramic teapots. This is tea adapted for speed, for efficiency. You might wince at the taste, but it keeps you going. The tea itself changes too. Loose leaf is still the gold standard, but the humble tea bag, once dismissed as an American oddity, starts to find its place here. Factory canteens embrace it for the sheer convenience. And slowly, roadside stops follow. The flavor may be blunter, but the brew is quicker. And on a motorway schedule, that matters. It's not that Britain is losing its tea soul. It's just that the road is teaching it to drink differently. In your mind's eye, you see one of these new motorway travelers. A man in a wool suit that smells faintly of petrol. His tie loosened, sitting in his Morris Minor on a windswept lay-by. He pours tea into the flask lid, his breath clouding in the morning chill. The sound of distant traffic hums through the hedgerows. For a moment, the road, the war, the rationing, they all fade. It's just tea, the same as it's been for centuries. But in a setting that would have seemed strange to his grandparents. Factories themselves begin to see the motorway as a supply artery. Trucks bring parts in and finished cars out. And the precision timing of production begins to echo in the workers' tea breaks. There's an odd symmetry to it. The assembly line and the tea break, both moving to the clock's command. Both part of a larger system. Even the motorway service areas, still in their infancy, take inspiration from factory layouts, with separate bays for fueling, parking, and eating. Efficiency is the order of the day, but there's still a stubborn Britishness in the details. Tea is never just poured from a pot. It's poured with a certain angle, a certain patience, even in the humblest settings. The landscape, too, is shifting. Motorways carve straight lines across farmland, cutting through old village routes where tea breaks once meant stopping at the same pub your father and grandfather had known. Now, the road decides your stopping point. The spontaneity is gone, replaced by fixed intervals, service areas every so many miles, lay-bys in between. You don't wander into a town for tea anymore. You let the road feed it to you. And yet, despite the creeping standardization, there's a curious comfort in it. The tea break survives because it adapts. It's a flask on a bench. It's a paper cup at a petrol station. It's the small victory of boiling water in a lorry cab with a portable kettle. Steam swirling against the windscreen. The road is changing Britain. But Britain is quietly infusing the road with its own rituals. By the late 1950s, you can sense the motorway age gaining momentum. The first true service stations are on the horizon, promising something bigger, warmer, and more permanent than a lay-by. But for now, the tea break remains a modest, intimate act, a reminder that even in the midst of steel, tarmac, and timetables, the human need for pause, for warmth, and for the slow pour of tea will not be engineered out. The hum of engines draws you onward, toward an era when the motorway will no longer just shape tea breaks. It will reinvent them entirely. The factory air grows warmer now, thick with the smell of oil and the faint metallic tang of fresh steel. Summer has settled over the town, and with it, the assembly line hums like an unbroken current of energy. You can see the workers, shirts rolled up to their elbows, forearms sheened with sweat, moving in the same measured rhythm they've perfected over months. A fan whirs lazily overhead, doing little to cool the space. But no one complains aloud. The work waits for no weather. You pass by a row of machines stamping out identical panels, each movement precise, each sound part of the symphony of production. One man, perhaps in his 50s, wipes his brow with a rag, then slides a fresh panel onto the conveyor with a practiced flick. His motions are economical, every gesture stripped of waste. You realize that for him, the rhythm isn't just physical. It's in his breathing, his posture, his entire being. This is what the line demands: consistency, constancy, and a certain surrender to its pace. The tea break whistle comes, sharp and familiar, cutting through the noise. The workers exhale as one, tools set down almost in unison. In the corner, you see a small table with enamel mugs already lined up, steam curling from a battered tin kettle. You pour yourself a cup and take a slow sip. The tea is stronger today, almost bitter, as though the leaves had steeped too long. Across from you, a younger worker makes a face at the taste, but he still drinks it. Waste isn't tolerated here, not in materials, not in time, not in tea. Near the far wall, someone has tacked up a calendar with a pin. The days are crossed out neatly in pencil, and you see that the next payday is circled in red. Conversations drift through the break room, some about wages, others about the weather, and one thread about a rumor. Management might be bringing in a second line to handle increased demand. It's an exciting thought, but also a sobering one. More lines mean more speed, more pressure, more precision required. When the whistle blows again, it's back to work. You follow the flow toward the chassis station, where workers are tightening bolts with mechanical wrenches. The repetitive clink-clack of the ratchets is hypnotic, almost like the ticking of a clock. You notice that each wrench is set to a specific torque. No guesswork allowed. In this world, good enough doesn't exist. Only exact. One man adjusts his wrench slightly, then tests the setting on a scrap piece of metal before returning to the line. This tiny pause, barely a heartbeat in the grand scheme, could mean the difference between a safe car and a dangerous one. You watch with a new respect for the unseen craftsmanship in every finished Model T, hidden under its paint and panels. Outside, the day stretches on, the sun burning hot against the roof. But inside, the rhythm doesn't waver. Time here is measured not in hours but in units produced. Bolts tightened, panels painted. The tea breaks are the only punctuation. Brief moments where the current slows before surging forward again. And as you move with it, you begin to feel a quiet truth. In this place, people and machines are not separate forces. They are parts of the same vast, humming organism. By now, the rhythm of your imagined journey has settled into something almost hypnotic. The clatter of the car's wheels along cobbled lanes. The distant hiss of a steam kettle somewhere inside a worker's break room. The smell of oil and rain. It all blurs together in a way that feels neither fully real nor entirely dreamlike. You notice how the assembly lines changes to break times ripple outward from the factory gates into the town's daily life. It isn't just about workers sipping tea more quickly or at different times. It's about shopkeepers adjusting their opening hours to match the new ebb and flow of customers. The bakery on the corner, for instance, used to sell its best buns by 9 o'clock sharp. Now, the baker holds back a fresh batch until the first wave of factory tea breaks lets out. Just before 11, when a tide of blue overalled men and women flood in, coins ready, you wander past the post office and see that even the postal clerks have shifted their mid-morning rituals. One leans over to the other and says, "Tea at 11:30 today?" Quote, and they nod, glancing at the clock as if the schedule has been somehow written into their very bones. You can sense that the rhythm of the entire community is now bound to the unrelenting heartbeat of the assembly line. Walking further, you pass a small printing shop. Inside, a man is feeding paper into a rattling press, each sheet covered with local notices and adverts. You lean closer and catch sight of one. Factory tea dance. Saturday night. A small illustration of a gramophone and a couple mid-spin accompanies the words. Even leisure activities are marketed in sync with the industrial schedule. The tea break has become more than a pause for rest. It is a cultural marker, a shared pulse. The thought strikes you that before the assembly line, the pace of life was dictated by sunlight, weather, and human endurance. Now, steel, gears, and a manager's stopwatch have the final say. This is no small shift. It is a quiet revolution. You pause at a narrow alleyway where two boys are kicking a leather ball back and forth. Every few minutes, they glance toward the road, anticipating the moment when the tea break crowd will pour out, bringing stories, sweets, or a few spare pennies for marbles. You notice, too, the physical transformation in the people themselves. Quick breaks mean less time to linger and chat, and more habit of eating quickly, standing, or walking while sipping tea. The once leisurely conversations have been replaced by a kind of verbal shorthand, an exchange of news boiled down to essentials. It's an economy of words to match the economy of time. Stepping inside a small cafe, you hear the faint tick of a wall clock, loud in the hush between customers. The owner, polishing a teapot, tells you without prompting, "They'll be in any minute. Got to have the pots ready." You realize she's timed her brewing perfectly to the factory whistle, so no drop is wasted. No pot sits too long to lose its heat. You sip your own tea slowly, feeling the curious tension between the enforced pace outside and your own unhurried moment here. The warmth spreads through your chest, and you think about how the world doesn't change with a bang but with a shift in the small, repeated moments of daily life. Even something as gentle as tea has been bent to the will of progress. When the whistle finally blows, the sound seems louder than before, not because of its volume, but because of the flood of movement it unleashes. Doors swing open, boots clatter on stone, conversations spark instantly, then are snuffed out just as fast when the minutes begin to run out. You finish your tea and step outside, watching the tide surge and recede again. As the last few workers hurry back through the gates, the streets return to a hush. The baker's trays are empty. The post office is silent. The cafe owner stacks her cups for the next wave. And you, standing at the edge of the pavement, can't help but wonder how long it will be before the next small but unstoppable change reshapes everything again. By now, you are well past the mid-century mark, and the quiet hum of progress feels almost like the steady ticking of an unseen clock. The factories that once roared with chaotic energy now purr with a rhythm born of decades of refinement. You wander into a workshop where the foreman, gray at the temples, Tells you how his father once stood right here in the early days of the line. He points to the gleaming conveyor belts and notes how they now glide almost noiselessly compared to the harsh clanking of his father's time. In the corner, a group of engineers huddle over a drafting table, not to reinvent the wheel, but to shave seconds off a process, to rearrange tools, to bring two parts just an inch closer for efficiency's sake. It's the same logic that once sped up T-brakes. Small gains, multiplied 1,000 times, become sweeping changes. You step outside to find that the town itself has adjusted to the factory's steady pulse. Streets are laid out to accommodate shifts. Buses run like clockwork, and even the baker knows exactly when to have fresh bread ready for the workers' break. There is no chaos, only an unspoken agreement between human and machine. In the canteen, you overhear a conversation about the upcoming switch to electric-powered lifts. Quieter, cleaner, more reliable. The men speak of it casually, the way their fathers might have spoken about changing the color of the walls. You realize that the extraordinary has become ordinary. Back in the office, ledgers show efficiency graphs rising steadily, the lines almost boring in their predictability. And yet, boredom is the very point here. Stability, not drama, is the measure of success. You run a hand along the smooth wooden banister as you climb the stairs, feeling the grain polished by decades of similar movements. This is a place that has been refined not just in function, but in gesture. Everything has found its place, and everything moves according to a plan laid out long before you arrived. The day draws to a close, and even the fading light through the windows seems to dim at just the right pace, as though it too knows the shift is ending. You leave with the quiet certainty that tomorrow will look much the same, and that, in this place, is a comfort beyond measure. You notice how the smell of the factory air has changed again. Less of that warm, sweet tang from fresh poured oil, and more of something sharper, cleaner, almost like the faint hint of new paint and warm metal. It makes you think of the slow seasonal turn outside the walls you've barely seen for weeks. The cooling days and the crispness of the autumn wind. Inside, the line ticks on, but the pace feels steadier now, almost relaxed compared to the frantic rush of summer production quotas. Fewer shouts, fewer flurries of parts rushing down the line, fewer make-do repairs to keep the machines humming. Everything's been tuned up in preparation for the slower season. Across the floor, a new notice board has appeared, nailed to a beam near the T-station. Someone's lettered the top in black paint. Winter breaks and shifts. Beneath it, typed memos spell out the new staggered break times that will go into effect next month. You wander over during a lull, scanning the pages until you find your shift. Your morning tea break will be 15 minutes earlier than before. Your afternoon one pushed back a little. Not much, but enough to keep the line running with fewer interruptions as daylight shortens and the company tries to squeeze maximum efficiency from each hour. You hear murmurs behind you. Two machinists talking about how these new tea schedules were argued over in the last Works Council meeting. The union reps pushed for longer breaks during the colder months, knowing that working near unheated sections of the plant would sap energy faster. Management countered that the heating bill was already steep enough, and if the line stopped too often, costs would spiral. The compromise, apparently, is small time shifts and the promise of thicker mugs and hotter kettles. Walking back to your station, you glance at the big windows high above. Sunlight is slanting through at a different angle now, illuminating the dust motes in a way you hadn't noticed before, each one catching the light like tiny floating stars. You realize that this light, this particular quality of gold-tinged brightness, will vanish in a few weeks, replaced by the cold gray of winter mornings. That change will alter everything. The way the metal feels under your hands, the way the steam curls from your tea, The way voices carry in the echoing space. When the afternoon break finally comes, you wrap both hands around your mug and breathe in deeply. The tea tastes the same, but somehow richer in the cooler air. You linger by the window, watching the yard outside, where stacks of wooden crates are being covered with tarpaulins to shield them from the coming frost. Somewhere in the distance, a bell rings. Not the break bell, but the end of shift signal for another department. You imagine their relief, their clatter of mugs and scraping chairs, their slow file towards the coat racks. It strikes you then that tea breaks aren't just about the tea. They're about marking the rhythm of life here, in a place where hours can blur into one another under the relentless logic of the assembly line. Breaks are the punctuation marks in an otherwise unbroken sentence of clanks, rattles, and hums. Without them, the days would stretch into a single, endless paragraph. And as you sip the last of your tea, letting the warmth fade slowly from your tongue, you know that tomorrow's break will be much the same, yet subtly different, carrying the tiny variations of mood, weather, and company that make each cup its own story. The final stretch of your nighttime journey through the history of the Citroën Amy 8 unfolds like the last few turns in a sleepy country lane, familiar, gentle, and bathed in the golden light of a low sun. You've been with this little French car since its hesitant birth in the late 1960s. Through the winding years of experimentation, slow sales, unexpected surges, and eventual decline. Now, as the story edges toward its conclusion, the pace slows even more, letting the details rest on your mind like falling leaves on still water. By the late 1970s, Citroën itself was in a new chapter, having been absorbed into the Peugeot-led PSA Group in 1976. The Amy 8, a car that had once represented an attempt to modernize the quirky Amy 6, now stood as something of a relic, a modest, slow-moving, easy-to-maintain little companion in an era when the automotive world was moving toward sleeker, more powerful, and more safety-conscious designs. You picture the Amy 8 in 1978, its square-cut front end already looking dated next to the aerodynamic experimentation beginning to take shape in other manufacturers' lineups. The Amy still carried the narrow, low tires, the soft suspension, the modest 602cc engine that hummed rather than roared. By then, the Renault 4 had grown into an institution, and even in rural French towns, you could see the competition pulling ahead in features and in sales. Yet the Amy 8 held onto a loyal base. Farmers, schoolteachers, small-town shopkeepers, people who didn't care about power or prestige. They just wanted something they could rely on, something they could fix with simple tools, something that felt like part of their daily rhythm. The end came quietly. Production of the Amy 8 in France ceased in 1978, replaced in Citroën's lineup by the newer, more modern Visa. The Visa, with its boxy hatchback shape and more conventional engineering, aimed squarely at the growing small car market across Europe. It was sensible, logical, and, if you're honest, a little dull compared to the Amy's oddball charm. The last Amy 8s rolled out without ceremony. No grand farewell. In Spain, production continued for a short time longer, as local demand lingered. But in the French market, the little car slipped out of the showrooms like a guest who didn't want to bother anyone with goodbyes. And yet, the Amy 8 refused to vanish completely. Through the 1980s and 1990s, these cars could still be found on back roads, often in weathered paint, their chrome dull, their upholstery patched, but their flat twin engines still ticking over cheerfully. In the used market, they were dirt cheap, sometimes sold for the price of a decent bicycle. Enthusiasts began to notice them not for their performance, but for their sheer improbability. In an age of mass-produced conformity, Here was a survivor from a time when French cars could be unapologetically peculiar. Collectors never truly swarmed to the Amy 8 the way they did to the 2CV. Its more famous sibling, the 2CV, had worldwide recognition, an iconic shape, and decades of stories attached. The Amy 8 was more of a connoisseur's choice, appreciated by those who liked its strange combination of awkwardness and honesty. And as the years passed, the survivors became rarer, not because they were fragile, but because so few people thought to preserve them. They simply faded from the streets, retired quietly, scrapped without ceremony. Now, if you look for one, you might spot it at a classic car meet, parked among the 1970s oddities. A wedge-shaped Simca, a Renault 16, a Peugeot 304. The Amy 8 doesn't scream for attention. It sits there politely, its gentle lines and modest chrome catching just enough light to reveal the care of its owner. In some small villages, there may still be an Amy 8 tucked away in a barn, sleeping under a layer of dust, its tires slowly deflating, its engine awaiting the next turn of the crank. Perhaps it was once the car that took a family to Sunday markets, carried kids to school, or rattled along a dirt lane to a summer picnic. These quiet memories cling to it like the scent of old upholstery. Faint, but impossible to erase. And so, the story of the Amy 8 ends the way it lived. Without hurry, without drama, and without the need for applause. In the warm haze of this final memory, you see it driving off one last time. Its little flat twin buzzing contentedly, its suspension swaying gently, its driver not rushing to get anywhere in particular. The road stretches ahead, lined with poplars, the evening air soft and still. The Amy 8 fades into the distance until it becomes just a small moving dot. And then nothing at all. But in your mind, it remains, forever trundling along. A quiet reminder that not all histories are written by the fastest or the most glamorous. Some are written by the slow, steady companions who simply keep going, mile after mile, year after year. And now, as you close your eyes, you can almost hear it again. That gentle, rhythmic hum, like a mechanical lullaby, carrying you off into sleep.